in his riveting and unsettling book called Night, Elie Wiesel describes his boyhood experience as one of countless victims of the Holocaust. Ripped from his home, separated from everybody in his family except his father, who would die in the death camps. Wiesel suffered a dark night of the soul, such as few will ever experience. And it challenged his views and beliefs about God. His innocence and faith became sacrifices on the altar of man's evil and sin's darkness. The psalm that Ken just read for us is the result of, you could tell as we're reading those words, he's struggling. He's going through some difficulties in his life. He's probably, when he wrote this psalm, when David wrote this psalm, he is probably running for his own life because his own son, Absalom, who had rebelled against him and taken David's throne by force, is out to get him. He's being pursued by his own son. Now, if I were to ask the question, what do we need more than anything else in life? We know, don't we, that the answer is God. It's like the children's sermon, or I had heard this story about, the pastor's talking and says, so who is it that, dresses in red and blue and says with great power comes great responsibility? You all know who I'm talking about, right? So one kid says, well, I know the answer's supposed to be Jesus, but it sure sounds a lot like Spider-Man. We've trained ourselves to know some ways that the answer. And so when I say, what do we need more than anything else in our life? We know the answer is God. More of God, more of Jesus. And so we're beginning this year to look at, how do I take that one step closer? What's the one thing that God's calling me to do today? Well, right now, in this point in my life, what's one way? We can get overwhelmed with all the different aspects of how we can do that, or if I'm supposed to look like Jesus, we can think, oh man, he's so perfect, how do I ever get there? We don't have to look at that. We just got to go, what's the one step, God, you're calling me to? And it's different for everybody. One step closer to Jesus, one step closer to being more like him. And we want to challenge our capacity for him. So, if you weren't here a couple of weeks ago, I did show a video of me kind of using a very physical illustration that will follow along in the next few months of me doing pull-ups, chin-ups, so whichever way that we talked about those. And I've been sick for 2 weeks, so I'm going, I probably could do less now than I could do the day that I showed you that, but I started with 7. And I'm thinking that wasn't a lot, but most of you are going, wow. So I guess because compared to what you can do, but we're 7. But I have to tell you, I'm working on it. I started working on it a bit more at the end of the week, and I actually did 8 yesterday. How's that? But I'll be showing you the progress. But that's just the capacity challenge, where if we want more of Jesus, we've got to challenge our capacity for him and how much, because sometimes, we know, right? Sometimes we're comfortable where we're at with Jesus. And sometimes we think that's, therefore our capacity is okay. So we don't know our capacity till we challenge it. And so we're really going to be turning that illustration more into the spiritual things over the next few weeks. And if you've been a Christian for a long time, I think sometimes we're tempted to think that we're fine right where we're at. I'm good. I got this Jesus thing. I'm going to church. I'm serving. I'm a good neighbor. I'm good. But as soon as we're tempted to think that, we're not good. See? That's where the trouble begins. So let me ask it this way, just to get our heads focused around where we're going to be heading here. think of just where you are in your Christian walk. This is very subjective, but think of your spiritual life, your Christian walk on a scale of 1 to 100. Okay, 100 being just like Jesus, perfect. Okay, don't tell me, don't shout it out. Just think in your own minds right now. Where would you be on that scale from 1 to 100? Now, I don't have to know anything about your Christian walk to know this. It might challenge you, You have a greater distance ahead of you than you do behind you. Okay? All we have to know is something about Jesus to know we've got a ways to go. It doesn't matter, how long we've been a Christian. I'm just trying to point out that we've all got a place. We've all got a step we can take. We're not fine where we're at. In fact, we never stay there. If we think we're fine right where we're at and we do nothing, we tend to move backwards. There's a greater distance ahead of us than there is behind us, no matter how old we are, no matter how long that we've been a Christian. And when you talk to somebody who's really mature in faith, I hear statements like this, their whole life they've been serving God, and they go, but you know what I find that the more I know about Jesus, the more I get to know Jesus, the more I realize I don't know. The expanse of who Jesus is and what it means to be like him just increases. My guess is it's going to be like that to the day I die. And that's okay. I'm not discouraged by that. In fact, I'm encouraged because it means Jesus has a whole lot more in store for me in ways that I don't even understand yet. And that's exciting. And it leads to a life of expectation of God. And I want that. I want a life like David who longs, desires more of God like a deer thirsting for water. That's why I like the beginning of that psalm so much. Because it's a challenge. That's a capacity challenge right there. Do I long for? Do I yearn for? Do I have a passion for more of Jesus? And how do we maintain that? Well, I think there's this psalm shows us that sometimes that comes from a very unlikely place. So first off, a couple weeks ago, I said that in order to take a step forward, we got to make sure we're facing in the right direction, right? So for some, maybe in an area in my life, or for somebody who doesn't even maybe know Jesus yet, the first thing they got to do is an about face. They're heading away from Jesus. They got to turn and face Jesus. That's the first step. If we're ever going to take one step closer, we got to make sure we're moving in the right direction, right? But we also now, I'm asking the question, but do you even have the desire? That longing that David talks about to be more like Jesus, to have more of God in your life. And this psalm reveals that one of the places we find that is actually in the struggles of life, from the trials. You know what? The struggles, the trials that you and I go through, they actually reveal what it is we're trusting in to make life work. And here we see David's deep longing to be closer to God because, listen, if God called David a man after God's own heart, right? That was kind of God's nickname for David. And he longs to be even closer to God. I'm thinking I need to get closer to God. Okay, I'm just saying. So this text today teaches us that we need God more than anything else. Right? And so if I were to just say, raise your hand if you would like to have a closer walk with Jesus. I'm hoping that every hand would go up, right? If you love Jesus Christ, then you want to be closer to him, just like anyone else you might love. And there are benefits. We know there are benefits to being closer to Jesus. They're enormous. When we're discouraged, right? He is the God of all comfort. When we're weary, Christ gives us strength. And if you want to know God's presence during the tough times in life, guess what? You've got to develop that relationship in the easy times. It's not a, God, I'm good, I'll call on you when I need you. It doesn't work that way. You ever have somebody in your life, friend, who only calls you when they need something? Oh, I guess so. Don't look around. Don't point any fingers, right? You don't hear from them in between the crises. That relationship gets depleted very quickly, doesn't it? Because you've got to have a relationship that's growing, building a foundation of caring and trust in the good times, not just the bad. See, when we don't actively build our relationship with Jesus Christ day in and day out, it's not that God abandons us in our trials. It's that when we're in the tough times, now we call on God, but we tend to have this unrealistic expectation because we really don't understand how God works. God's not fixing it the way I want, so he must not be there, or he doesn't care, or he's punishing me, and we get all of these wrong understandings of God. What we need in that time is to experience the abiding presence of a God who will give us perspective, this perspective we need in the midst of the trials, and the strength and the peace, whatever it is that we need. But we're only going to experience that in the tough times when we have developed it deeply in the easier times. I assume everybody here wants to live every day with more comfort and more confidence, more strength. So the question is how? How do we get closer to Christ? Truth maybe that we don't want to face is that every one of us is as close to God as we feel we need to be. If you want to want Christ more than you do right now, let me just spend a few minutes focusing on a few things this psalm talks about. And the first one is this: begin to see God working in your trials. We see that with David in this psalm. Seeing God during the trial isn't easy because pain, whether it's physical or emotional, hurts, and by nature we focus on our pain. And somehow we've got to see past the disappointment or the pain, and we can do that if we understand that God is in fact our greatest need. My soul pants for you. You are my greatest need. I long for you. We can go a long time without food, but water is something we've got to have regularly in order to survive. So we can't settle for some second-rate, easy, temporary solution. Ignoring our problems doesn't help either. There's work involved in any attempts to manipulate people or circumstances. They don't solve the problem. God is much more than a lifeguard who's there to drag us out of our circumstances when life is pulling us under. God has to be much more to us than the tissue we use to dry our tears. Because when the tears are gone, we'll toss God away like we do the Kleenex. We will not pant for God till we see how desperately we need him. Jesus is very clear that without him, we're helpless. John 15, verse 5, I am the vine, you are the branches, Jesus said. He who abides in me, and I in him, he bears much fruit, for apart from me, you can do nothing. See, the solution isn't that we have to work harder for God. The solution is an intimate relationship with God. Trust in the Lord with all of your heart, and lean not on your own understanding, from Proverbs chapter 3, right? In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your paths straight. See, a deer looks for streams of water because he knows that a few drinks from a puddle aren't going to do. Verse 4, one thing I have asked from the Lord, that shall I seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to behold Lord and to meditate in his temple. Do you hear the longing, the desire, the passion? In Psalm 143, verse 6, it says, I spread out my hands to you. I thirst for you like a parched land. I think we need Paul's attitude about the importance of being close to Christ. In Philippians 3:8, he says, more than that, I count all things to be loss in view of the surpassing value of knowing Christ. Not knowing about him, but knowing him. Jesus, my Lord, for whom I have suffered the loss of all things, and count them but rubbish, so that I may gain Christ. That's how Paul could rejoice even when he was in prison. Because Paul knew God controlled his life, even in the midst of the trials. So he looked for ways that God could be using his circumstances for his glory. Are you thirsty? Are you thirsty for God? If you're mostly satisfied with your life and yet you rarely or never seek the presence of God, you're in danger. If you have a deep thirst for God's presence in your life, then there's good news. Because God wants to satisfy your thirst. He says in Isaiah 55, verse 1, come, all who are thirsty, come to the waters. You who have no money, come, buy and eat. Come buy wine and milk without money and without cost. He wants to satisfy your thirst. The thirst that we feel in our hearts can only be satisfied by Christ. Tradition grew up a few centuries before Jesus, actually, that on the 7 days of the Feast of Tabernacles, Jewish feast, a golden container filled with water from the pool of Siloam was carried in procession by the high priest back to the temple. And as the procession came to the water gate on the south side of the inner temple court, 3 trumpet blasts were made to mark the joy of the occasion, and the people recited Isaiah 12, verse 3. With joy you will draw water from the wells of salvation. And at the temple, while onlookers watched, the priests would march around the altar with the water container, and the temple choir sang the Hallel, which is from Psalms 113 to 118. The water was offered in a sacrifice to God at the time of the morning sacrifice. See, the use of the water symbolized the blessing of adequate rain for the crops. Jesus used that event as an object lesson and an opportunity to make a very public invitation on the last day of the feast for his people to accept him as the living water. You remember the story where Jesus met the woman at the well. What did he say to her? If you knew the gift of God and the one who says this to you, give me a drink, you would have asked him and he would have given you living water. More of Jesus. More of Christ. Jesus promises, and he keeps his promises, right? From Matthew 5:6. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Amen? So in the next few weeks, we're just going to, in some very practical ways, look at the different areas and our purposes as a church, but what's one way you can take a step closer? How can you do that in worship? How can you do that in discipleship? One step closer to being like Jesus, to following him, to having a more intimate relationship with him. As we seek to start this year going, yes, I need more. I need more of you, Jesus. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you so much that there is so much more that you have to offer than we already have. And that might be hard to believe. So some of us are, we are immersed in you and in your word, but God, there's so much more. So instill in our hearts, just as we begin this, simply the desire, God. The desire of more of you. That Jesus, you would be the center of our lives. Lord, break down anything that would keep us, any barrier that would keep us from doing that. Any fears, dispel. Any sense of intrepidation or any of those things, God, remove them. Any doubt, God, fill with faith. And reveal to each and every one of us, Lord, what is that one step I'm supposed to take right now? What's one thing I can do that I might have more of you? I pray in Jesus' name.